we can debate this. I think you can go back and forth on it, but I think Carolina potentially is, you know, the best value potentially for the Texans. And why that is, David Tepper, if you don't know his story, he was a minority owner in the Steelers, used to work for Goldman Sachs Investment Bank. He was passed over for a promotion at Goldman Sachs, left, and then the manager that passed him over, he then bought his house in the Hamptons, bulldozed it, and built one twice the size on the same land. And that's a kind of a mark of the guy, and I've heard him sort of, complain at restaurants and just buy the restaurant there and then. He gets what he wants, or he certainly had a pattern of that in his life. He didn't necessarily come across that as much in Hard Knocks, I'd have to say, but maybe the media's exaggerate some of that right enough. But anyway, he's a guy who gets what he wants. He's a billionaire that owns an NFL franchise, so you don't get much more, kind of elite in terms of the power stakes, I suppose, than that. He wants to win. He's seen two quarterbacks come in the last 2 years. This is Matt Rule going to his third year, potentially on the hot seat. Very impatient, wants to take gambles, and I can guarantee if he's willing to buy a house and bulldoze it just for the fuck of it, then I think he'll definitely outbid his divisional rivals for a quarterback.
I think so as well. And like you were just saying, man, I think the package that he can offer is arguably the best. For me, it's probably the best. I think the Browns can offer something kind of similar, depending on which young players you're adding and stuff like that. But he's the guy that wants, at least as we publicly know, wants Watson the most. And that's mostly from reports and stuff like that. And, there's something to be said about that, because obviously Carolina is not like the most appealing place for a guy like Watson. Obviously you got like the New Yorks of the world, the New Orleans, stuff like that. But an owner that really, really wants you and apparently is willing to let you choose the next head coach if they were to fire Rule and stuff like that, there's something to be said about that. And hopefully, for me at least, I hope he can get it done, because looking at the Falcons and the Saints and stuff like that, I think he definitely can offer a better package.
Yeah, well, I think when you look, I suppose when it's the down payment, right, the primary asset of this draft could be the 6th overall pick from Carolina. And when you're sitting at 3rd and 6th, that gives you a lot of flexibility to move up and down the board. In theory it does. I think when you look at this draft class, I don't know how many Will and Dan's partners you got to come right up to those spots, but that we could talk. That's another debate, I'm thinking. But that gives you premium spots where you basically get, you're going to get the best player at a certain position and of a premium position, more than likely in 2 spots. So therefore, if you take one side of the ball, for example, you take 2 on defense, you have a bit of a transformation. But I think when you consider the Carolina offer, they don't have a 2nd round pick and they don't have a 3rd round pick this year. So there's going to be a limited, in terms of equity flow from the 2 ball clubs. That's going to feel a little bit shortchanged in year one. I think the only way you negotiate around that is by asking for more players up front, because obviously they've got their picks in the second year and the 3rd year, so you could get the 3 first, and I think that's pretty much a given. I think at this point, plus the extras, and the extras, they are what they are. They're just sweeteners right on the end of it, and it's really the draft picks and how many first, where the firsts are, and the players. In terms of the requests back, if you were Caserio put into Carolina, who would you be asking for off that roster? Say you can have up to 3 players, but you choose what you'd ask for.
So for Carolina, so I also want to add something, because you mentioned the 6th pick, and I don't know if you saw the tweet. I believe it was from John Crumpler about the draft value chart, right? And how the 6th pick is actually like more valuable than the Saints' 1st, 2nd, and 3rd this year, based on that draft value chart, just because it's so valuable at 6. So that's also something to add into this, and how much Carolina can give and stuff. But to get back to your question, what I would ask for, my I guess ideal offer is, I would, obviously you got Brian Burns, you have who's the corner, J.C. Horn. Obviously would love to have those guys on the field, or love on the Texans. I mean, who I would choose though, I would ask for Derek Brown, and Jeremy Chin for players wise. And I know you just kind of touched on how you kind of don't necessarily want to do that because they were both drafted in the same class, and you don't want to have to pay them at the same time. But obviously Derek Brown has the 5th year, or will have the 5th year option, where
Mm.
Jeremy Chin was a 2nd rounder and he'll have 4 years. So it's a little bit different, or you got a little bit of a gap there, I guess we could say. But those two players, specifically, I want to touch on Chin real quick, because I think the dude is a really good safety, but I think he can be an elite linebacker, especially with Lovey's system. So that's something I would do, is I would move him down to linebacker, and then play Brown as the 3 tech. But after that, you get to the picks, and obviously you want pick 6. I think you take pick 106 in the 4th round this year. Yeah. And then you get the first round picks in 23 and 24. And I think you're taking the seconds and the thirds in 23 and 24, because I think he's willing to offer them, Tepper that is. And like you just said, they don't have those seconds and thirds this year. So I think you're going to be asking for those as additional compensation, because we don't have that this year.
Yeah. So I think you're right on the picks thing. You got the 3 first and you got 2 seconds, 2 thirds. That probably then either there's a question of those seconds and thirds. You're not getting them up front, therefore there's a justification of getting them on the year 2 and year 3. But then I suppose how many players can you leverage out of those extra picks? Right. If you say basically like there's no deal without 3 first round picks. But if you were to say and ultimately I think it's Matt Rule, I think Scott Fritter is just a bit of a kind of, number 2 really, and because he was brought in, well after a Rule, and he was given the big contract and all this kind of stuff. So for me, I think you're right on. For me, I couldn't agree more on Derek Brown. I think he's a rare talent. You don't get guys like that. Albeit there's not anybody of that quality at the defensive tackle spot in this year's draft. Certainly, right. The power of an interior rusher is has so much value. And Brian Burns is a flashy name, absolutely. But there's only, but I think you can get guys like that, and particularly if there's any position in this draft class that is definitive strength, it's edge rusher. I think you could probably find a nice piece in the 3rd and 4th round this year. So, I think for me it would be those picks we talked about, and depending on the day 2 and 3 picks, it would be depending on how many guys you could get out. Now, one consideration I have on Jeremy Chin is you could take Kyle Hamilton at 3 or 6. And you're kind of duplicating that at that point and potentially taking back, or not taking the best player in all-round football player in this draft. And then also at the same time, you have a position where you might have to make Jeremy Chin the highest paid safety in, 2 years' time, a year's time.
Right. So, yeah, that's an interesting aspect. And that's kind of also, like, say you did do that, I definitely would move Chin down to linebacker if that was me there. I don't know if they're redundant. I heard their skill sets, are redundant. Like I heard someone on YouTube kind of say the same thing, that their skill sets are kind of redundant. The Tampa 2 cover 2 system is kind of redundant. They do the same things, both safeties, right? So, but as far as that goes, like I was saying earlier, man, I think if you were getting Hamilton at 6 and you're playing him as your free safety or whatever, and then you move Jeremy Chin down to your will linebacker spot, right? And he's covering curl to fly, and he's getting 100 tackles a year. You're not necessarily having to pay, obviously, him as one of the highest paid safeties or whatever when his contract's up, and then you got Hamilton up in 2 more years, right? So you're not putting that much money into what people would consider not a what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say primary, but like a pivotal position, I guess we could say, right? So that if that's the route you go, I would definitely move him down, because he did it anyways. He was basically a linebacker year 1, and then he did it in spots this year. But that's how I would go about it. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, ultimately you get as many, like, for me, I've always had the philosophy of defense is just about stacking talent. So, if you've got 3 Jeremy Chins, you'll find a way to get them on the field at the one time.
Yeah,
and I think that's the task for Lovie Smith to do in boss managing, the head coaching task. I think for me, as well, the JC Horn, he was the best corner in the draft last year, but he's from the limited stuff I've watched, he's pretty. I know he's got injured last year, which is always a kind of a worry when a rookie gets injured and misses time, and how quickly they come back, because corner is a year-to-year position. So yeah, he's probably not as safe as he would have been if he had been healthy. So there's that consideration, and he's a bit of a press man guy. He's got some good hand fighting skills from the limited tape I watched him last year. I've been far more into this year's class just with finally having picked picks than I have been the last couple, but
Yeah.
naturally. But yeah, no, I think that there's options there, and I think, for me, you could get C.G. Henderson, who was a top 10 pick, before Urban Meyer just jettisons him from Jacksonville for no real reason. And he's kind of been more trending towards the slot. And look at, was he a top 8 pick? I think he went in, I'm sure, because I won some money on that one, because it just was so Jacksonville to do that. But there's guys here, I think, when you're taking these you want high upside guys who are going to pay off more than they might now. They didn't draft him, they're not attached to him. He's a guy that I think you could maybe get as, an extra player. And Gross Matos as well at Penn State, I think, he's not necessarily played as much football as he would have wanted, with a mix of injuries. And last year kind of got kind of his groove a bit, but with those, I think he's got 36 inch arms, 65 pounds. He's the prototype kind of 4-3 defensive end. You get him under Jacques Cesar. Could you see an upside there? I think quite possibly. And I think that's some kind of names there I'd be asking. Look, and Robbie Anderson's a cut, potential throw in as well. Because they gave him that extension last year, and now it looks like they're maybe not too happy with that extension. So, and they're going to need to clear some more cap space. So, if we move him out, then you get a guy that stretches the field for our Davis. So there is definitely the opportunity there, and I think for me, I may change my mind as we go through this, but I think there's a bit of trade judo to be played against David Tepper and his aggression towards that. Now, next option on the board is New Orleans. Obviously, the primary pick in this year's draft is 18th. Right. What do you think of New Orleans as a proposition? And like Mickey Loomis, Dennis Allen were supposedly in town on Monday. How do you think they were selling New Orleans, and what do you think they'll be selling Caserio to try and get him?
Yeah, and for me personally, New Orleans is the least attractive trade destination from a Texans fan perspective. Obviously you got the picks. You'll have the first, second, and third this year that we're kind of mentioning that Carolina doesn't have. And I believe they have an extra second or third in it next year or something like that. It's something like that, right? But
so the compensatory picks have just come out, and they've got 2 compensatory picks for this. So I mean, there is an opportunity to get a first, second, 2/3 in year one, which I think potentially depending on how you value this draft class, which I think it's not an all timer, it's not a 2011 sort of job. Then that does carry a value though. You can kind of get a good down payment on the class. Right.
I agree. So you heard about Ryan Ramczyk, the right tackle. Obviously, I would take him. My thing with him, though, is specifically for this year, he's owed $8 million or so, right? For if he stays with New Orleans. If they were to trade him pre-June 1st, his dead cap it would be $24 million.
Yeah, so I don't know how his name was ever involved, and it's just come out as we've been on air as well, Cody, that is saying that the Texans are expected not to trade Tunsil and keep with him. So yeah, I never thought that Ramczyk pick really was a fit.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me either, especially because I think Titus is going to be your right tackle. And if you're keeping Tunsil, are you moving Titus back to guard, which he wasn't very good at, stuff like that. So, thank you. Yeah, I agree. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Marcus Davenport just got restructured as well. So I'm wondering – say that again?
No, I was going to say, no, I think that's right. And my understanding was that they would take a bigger cap hit. So can they, exactly. same principle? Can they endure that, or are they safeguarding themselves from not having to trade them? In a roundabout way, perhaps, I don't know. But yeah, I thought that because he was a name that I'd written down, because ultimately, you want to try and get a guy in the trenches out of this probably if you can, because that's what's going to have the most impact. And I did have them, but ultimately you would have had to extend them. But they've restructured that 5th year. The name I had, Cody, was Paulson Adebo, 3 interceptions last year, 66 tackles, Stanford guy. He'll fit that kind of cultural element there. You've got to think, albeit he was last year's 2nd or 3rd round pick from them. But I think there's potential value there. What do you think of him?
Yeah, it was just they were the 3rd round pick. I haven't watched him, but I had heard his name pop up a few times, and I need to get into it in case that is the deal, right? So I do like that. From this, just looking at statistics, he had a solid season, like you just said. And so I wouldn't be mad at that. Obviously, another guy to name would be obviously Peyton Turner, their first round pick from last year. Their defensive end got hurt this year. But like I said, it's not the most appealing. Obviously, you have guys like Marshawn Lattimore that might be in the deal. But my thing is, man, like he's still young, but he is already on his second contract, right? So for me, going and getting those guys that are already on the second contract, although they are good, we're not though. How do I phrase this? We're not those guys away from winning, right? Like we still have to build up the team, right? So, how is it going to help? We don't know when we'll be ready to compete, how we hit on draft picks, stuff like that, right? It's all relative, but for those guys specifically, I don't know if you go and trade for those guys because you're already going to have to pay them. They're going to be good for you, fine, but like they're going to be. If he's 26 right now, he's going to be 28, 29, when we're ready to play. And how does his play decline as it goes, right? So as the years go on. So it's just, for me, I would obviously like guys on rookie contracts that you can mold into what you want to do. Wouldn't obviously be opposed. I'm not going to be mad that we got Marshawn Lattimore, right? So, but for me specifically, that's why the New Orleans deal is the least attractive to me.
Yeah, I think so, because I struggle to pick players out of it. I think, when fans are commenting on like Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan, obviously there's kind of links there, but, certainly there was a sentiment from some of the stuff I read that he's not necessarily lived up to that pick. And then you think, interior's our biggest need. Don't think AG Can's going to fix that. So, as Eric McCoy, but again, he's 2019 draft class coming out of Texas A&M, so you're going to have to pay him, within the next, shortly. So, if he's not already been up, so you've got that kind of element there as well. So yeah, I think for me right now, we're probably in agreement that New Orleans is the kind of bottom spot for in terms of where you desperately want to kind of see the Caserio pulling the trigger. Now Cleveland was the third team to meet. With Watson supposedly today in between depositions. Don't bear that, I thought. So long day for the poor guy. But Cleveland is an interesting one because I think, as you said earlier, it's probably the best on paper in terms of opportunity. There's probably a fair bit of meat there you can get in terms of players back. Again, there's no impediment to their picks. They've got the full suite for the next couple of years. So what do you think of the kind of Cleveland opposition in terms of the value that could represent?
So, yeah, real quick, from a roster perspective, I think it should be the most appealing to Watson, right? Because especially if you can make a deal from Cleveland's perspective and not have to give up your guys like Myles Garrett, right? Like, obviously, we'd probably ask for that and want that. Yep. But, for me, like I tweeted this out earlier, if you can get guys like Greg Newsome, the rookie corner, Grant Delpit, and JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker, also linebacker. Those three guys, along with, pick 13, they have their second. They have 2/3. They also have a comp pick in the third round, I believe.
Yeah.
You comp picks for next year. I think that's something that they can do without having to give up their top guys, right? Obviously, everyone's going to want those guys because they're so good. But same thing we just talked about with New Orleans. How does Myles Garrett play decline because he's gonna be 27 this year when he's 29 years old? It's like, I would hate for that to turn out to kind of the Khalil Mack thing where he didn't really live up to what they traded for, in my opinion, right? So for me, and like Greg Newsome, I'll mention real quick, he played really solid as well. He got hurt, I believe. He only started 11 games, but for a guy that had 9 pass breakups, he allowed a 63% completion percentage this year. He had 44 combined tackles or 40 or something like that.
Yeah, so 4 and a bit a game, which is pretty good. Yeah.
For 11 games, it's not bad. He didn't get any interceptions, but for rookie corners are thrown to the wolves with some of these receivers that are out there nowadays. Even number twos. So for him to have that stat line in 11 games starting was really impressive to me. And then JOK, I loved him coming out. I love Grant Delpit coming out as well. He has a skill set that like guys like Reed, we were talking about earlier, doesn't have, like as a single high safety kind of thing. And he was basically a rookie last year because he got hurt all of his actual rookie year. So those 3 guys I would name, and then obviously the same amount of picks that we're talking about from Carolina and from New Orleans and stuff like that. And Cleveland gets to keep their top two guys as well as get the quarterback, right? So I don't know how you feel about that, but that deal it interests me. It's close up there with the Carolina deal, in my opinion.
So it was JOK, Delpit, and who was the third one?
Greg Newsome.
Newsome, yeah. I think that's probably a realistic one. I think because you think they probably don't want to give up their top corner in Denzel Ward. He's obviously going to have a higher cap implication as he's he's going to be more expensive ultimately. He's further into his career, so therefore by definition, you've got Newsome, who potentially, we're going to talking about bets, could have that higher ceiling. We don't know, and I think his tape at TCU was pretty good. There's a reason why he went in the first round. So I think when you get the 3 firsts. Again, you may have to concede on some of those day 2 picks right there, but you could potentially get a first, a second, and 2/3 in year 1, and then kind of relinquish some of the back end later picks if you get some guys up front. And like a second may turn to a third, and a third may turn to a fourth or something like that as a concession for them. And I think that there's definitely players there that if they're going to overpay because they want to keep them in the AFC. Then I think that's a package that is potentially almost more inviting than the Carolina one. But I think that comes back to that situation that we said that actually you could have a team that's paying slightly more, but there's a preference for the no trade clauses, and potentially Carolina is in the front. So if you think of Carolina being kind of the front runner, you have the mysterious entrant today of Atlanta. What do you think of, obviously there's all those connections there. What do you think of the potential of the Atlanta offer, and what kind of guys would you be looking back if in the trade?
Yeah, there's some guys I like. Obviously you have Kyle Pitts, who is just one of a kind at the tight end position. I guess I don't want to say one of a kind, but as a prospect, we haven't seen a guy like him come out in a while, right? So Kyle Pitts, obviously they wouldn't want to part with him, but you got to have to part with someone, right? So Kyle Pitts is guy one. AJ Terrell, their cornerback, I think he just played his 3rd year, right? So he'll be going into his 4th year this year, if I'm not mistaken. So he have this year and next year on his 5th year option. And then another guy I would look into is Chris Lindstrom, their guard. And I'm not sure what year he was drafted. But
2019, I was there, watched it. I remember did they not trade back up into the did they trade? No, that was Caleb Gary that they came back into, but they took both him in the first round in 2019. Yeah.
So, but those are 3 guys I like. It's just interesting because like we were talking about earlier, the Matt Ryan thing, man, like we wouldn't take him back. I wouldn't assume. Would they move him to like Indianapolis or something like that? Like it would be interesting to see what they would do.
Well, yeah, because obviously there's a huge cap there, and I don't know the economics of it. But what they thought was, well, could you do something similar to what Detroit did? Because let's be honest, right, we're not going to win the playoffs or win a playoff game this year. Could there be a way where you could restructure some of it, take some of the hit this year by clearing out a lot of these guys that we've got on cap? Because I think we had about 22 million, 23 million we could clear out. I think we've only really cleared out 8 before the Eric Murray proposed restructure, which we've not seen the detail. Obviously, there's some incremental spend there with some guys, but is there a way which we can? Obviously, we're incredibly hamstrung by the 36 million dead cap. A huge portion of is Zach Cunningham. But would there be a way that you could bring in Matt Ryan for a year, void these later years, give him basically a 1 year, see what you've got left in the tank, but yet get an extra pick out of it?
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I actually meant to mention that in the Carolina deal, something like if you can ensure you can get the guys you want player wise, take on Sam Darnold, something like that is a similar situation. But it would be interesting because we only clear 24 million from Watson. Well, so this year, that's the difference between his contract and what his dead cap hit would be, right? So. Yeah. 24 mil, and then I don't know what Matt's contract is. Obviously, it would have to be restructured, right? Because I don't know if you have enough, like just straight up, because his contract his cap hit this year is pretty hefty, right? So it'd have to be restructured and add voidable years. So, if you get an extra pick out of that, I'm all for it, and you can make it work. I'm all for that. But it's hard to see, for me, in my opinion, right now, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think is it not a potential dead hit of something ludicrous? You look that one up there, but I think I think that's going to be a big impediment. So that was why I was surprised to see them there.
Yeah, me too.
But they do have 2 second-round picks this year as well,
That's
which
right.
which kind of gives a little bit. And I think, often you find in drafts, not every year, but often you find in drafts the real value can often be in the second round. And albeit you only get them for 4 years, but maybe having that potentially, that was that was the trade with Tennessee for Julio Jones. Have got that pick, so there is a potential there to get that. I just don't see how the whole cap thing works. Of course, there's a way if you're willing to pay signing bonuses and what have you. But it's and as long as your owner's willing to shell out the cash, there's often a way around the cap. I think we learned that, but particularly in New Orleans as well. But that's one. So yeah, I think the guys there in terms of who you'd ask for back. I think there's a number. There's a number of guys there. I think you got AJ Terrell at corner again. It's probably like the JC Horn prospect. Would they give him up? I don't think necessarily. Would they give up Kyle Pitts as effectively? You might have to wipe off every second if you were to hold on to those 3. You might have to wipe off every day 2 pick if you were going to take a player of that value. I think.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add on to something you were just saying about the value in the second rounds, it's off topic for what you're just talking about, but it came back to my mind when you said it. This draft specifically, I heard, obviously I think we both agree it's not as top heavy as especially the last draft or maybe even the last 2 drafts, but because of the COVID year and stuff like that, this draft is specifically deep because there is double the amount of prospects in this draft.
Yeah.
So I think the number I heard was 4,000 prospects, and typically in a typical draft it's 2,000. So just that amount of prospects makes this class extremely deep. And I even heard Brett Coleman talking about it at the Shrine Bowl games, how they were able to get some of these guys that they might not have gotten before because this class is so deep, right? So adding those seconds and third is definitely going to be valuable this year, I think. So, but to get back, what did you asked? About
just in terms of getting players back, I think the other one from Atlanta would be Richie Grant from UCF last year. I think decent safety, rangy, can do a number of things. I think he's one of these guys, perhaps an all rounder. Maybe that's unfair, but a guy who can give you some mobility on the back end. And when you're playing zone, you need mobility. So
right.
A guy that potentially could come in. But yeah, I mean, after going through all those, if you were to rank those 4 teams. Where would you say is the best to last in terms of what value Caserio can get back?
I think you got a 1A, 1B situation with Carolina and Cleveland, in my opinion, because we kind of talked about those players from Cleveland are really tempting. So for me to rank it, I'll just go 1A Carolina, 1B Cleveland, and then I think you got Atlanta next, because I do actually like some of the players that they might be able to give up, even if it's just Chris Lindstrom. I would like that more than getting Cesar Ruiz from New Orleans, right? So that's 3 Atlanta, 4 New Orleans. That's probably how I would rank it.
Yeah.